Arena, one thing to let you know is I don't have a full script for this evening. So if I miss any of the formal parts that I'm supposed to cover in the introduction, do you mind jumping in and letting me know if I've forgotten to say anything?
Yes, I will do my best.
Okay, thank you.
I have your back.
Sounds good. Thank you.
We'll get through it.
All right. Well, I see that on my screen, people's videos aren't on, so maybe I will also turn off my video so I'm not the only one with a video on. But before I do, just welcome. Glad to see so many people this evening. Um, as as we all know, the Metropolitan Council Chair has determined it's not practical or prudent for us to meet in person. So we're doing all meetings via telephone or electronic means. And this meeting is being conducted on WebEx. We will be streaming and recording this meeting, so you can watch the meeting online if you choose. If you have some interest in publics, if you are a member of the public who wishes to speak publicly, we ask that you please pre-register that information by emailing public.info at metc.state.min.us. We haven't gotten any requests for public comment for today's meeting. We also will ask you that if you have a comment or question to share throughout the course of the meeting, to please use the raise hand feature. You do that at the bottom of your screen. There's 3 dots at the bottom of your screen. If you click on them, you'll see that there's an opportunity to raise your hand. I will be keeping an eye out for people that have raised their hand and call on you for a question or comment. And then when you are ready to speak, please unmute yourself and share your comment verbally. And if you're using 2 devices, if you're using both a computer and a phone, please just unmute one device at a time so we don't get feedback. Because this is a public meeting, please don't share your comments or questions in the chat if you can avoid it. Although do feel free to use the chat if you need some technical support. Notice that the screen share isn't working. If there's anything that's kind of meeting logistics, please feel free to use the chat for that. But anything that's substantive, we'd love to have recorded and stated verbally. Arena, is there anything that I forgot to mention in the introduction?
Oh, you're doing great.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. I think we will do a roll call. And Arena, will it be you or Lila that will be doing the roll call this evening?
This time around, I will be doing the roll call.
All right.
Next time, Lila will be doing it.
All right. So we will do some introductions in a moment, but we will start with roll call.
Okay, so welcome committee members and friends tonight to the EAC. So for this first call, I will be calling full names. So, and then any subsequent roll calls will just be last name only. So if you're here, please say that you are here and we will mark you down. So Lanice Block, Nicole Ellis McGregor, Leah Goldstein Moses,
Here.
Francisco Gonzalez, he's out. Nicholas Jenkins,
Here.
Chai Lee, Michael Luceni, Edward McDonald,
Here.
Juliana Miller, T. Way, Brianne Rothstein,
Here.
Sarah Rudolph, Mohammed Sheikh, Nalima Sitate Munene,
Here.
Philip Sterner,
Present.
Anita Irvina Davis.
Here.
Great, thank you. And I see that you're here, Nicole. So I marked you down. Thank you.
Great. And then, Arena, I believe from your chat, we do not have quorum yet. Is that correct?
You're up to 8. So
Okay.
I will keep an eye on the participants, and if somebody else comes in, I will let you know.
Okay, that sounds good. So we are going to wait to do an approval of the minutes from previous meetings until we have quorum, which I am confident we will have before we're done. I wanted to also just take a few minutes to welcome Lila to our meeting. Lila, would you like to spend a few minutes introducing yourself and talking a little bit about what you will focus on while you're at the council?
Sure. Hi. I am, well, first of all, thank you so much for including me and giving me the opportunity to introduce myself tonight. I am Lila El-Tawili, and I am obviously new to the council. I'm the new Enterprise Equity Senior Manager, and I've been here 2 weeks today. I come with a very diverse background. I shared previously that I started in corporate diversity close to 20 years ago. Moved out into entrepreneurship and community organizations, nonprofits. I managed the property records division at Washington County for a little while. Ran for office in 2018. I ran for state representative, and I've spent several years in civic engagement and community engagement, and also founded a nonprofit called East Metro for a Better Tomorrow that focuses on social justice actions in the East Metro and connecting areas. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to be here. I see myself as a connector. I connect people to other people. I connect people to resources, community, and things like that. And so I see my role as a person who will be here to support the work done at the EAC, excuse me, and uplift it and move it in the way that it needs to be moved. So thank you.
Thank you and welcome. And we also have a number of council members and staff here this evening. We usually wouldn't take time at the beginning of our meeting to do introductions, and we are going to be getting to a couple of our agenda items with the BiPAC group discussion and then the transportation equity investment evaluation in a moment. So I'd like to hold introductions until we get to those parts of the agenda. So don't worry, I haven't forgotten that you're here, and I'm very glad that you're here. We are going to do one part of our business agenda, and then we are going to be moving on to our conversation with the BiPOC group discussion. So for our business agenda, we would love some reports from our subcommittees. And I do not believe we have any members here from our transportation subcommittee. Is that correct? I don't see Sarah, and T I know is unable to join. Does anybody else want to give a report from the transportation subcommittee? All right. For our operations subcommittee, I see that Edward is here. I don't know if Mohammed or Michael is here yet, but Edward, do you want to share a couple words about what we've been working on in the operations subcommittee?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of EAC, our committee met yesterday, and we continued to work on aspects of our work plan. Yesterday, we had pretty broad, enlightening, informed discussion around how to improve contracting with minority business enterprises. And the focus of that discussion was around moving to a race-conscious approach to contracting. And obviously, broad-ranging discussion, and I won't go through all of it. But at the end of the day, there are a couple different ways that we want to approach it, and the staff is going to explore what will be most beneficial, and obviously would meet all of the regulatory guidelines for doing such such an effort. And we will continue that discussion a little bit more, and maybe we'll have some recommendations to bring back to the full EAC after that meeting. In addition to that, we are beginning some conversations where we're going to invite minority business enterprise associations, entities like the National Association of Minority Contractors, the various ethnic chambers, and others that would come to our subcommittee to just talk about their associations, how they're interfacing with the Met Council and contracting, and what are some of the challenges and how we can work with them to expand opportunities with the Met Council. That's as much as I remember, Madam Chair. You were there. If there's other people here that can add, please do.
Thank you so much, Edward. And I realized right after I called on you that I put you on the spot and didn't give you any warning that I was going to do that. So thank you very much for sharing that update. And is there anyone here from our Affordable Housing Subcommittee that would like to share a little bit about what your subcommittee has been working on?
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Brianne Rothstein, and I'm on the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, as well as Edward and Lima and Michael. So we have not met since our last meeting. We do have a meeting scheduled October 4th, and there are a few agenda items, a summary of next steps related to the housing policy plan work. So I know that a couple members of the committee met with staff to discuss the timeline for the update and ways that the EAC can plug into that work. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that and develop kind of a some brainstorming and ideas for how to plug in. And then we also have in our work plan to convene conversations around affordable housing. And again, brainstorm ways we can plug into the affordable housing policy work that the Met Council is already doing. And just along those lines, we just received an email this, I think, afternoon about LAIH. So we're really interested in hearing about how we can contribute to the input that they're seeking on that draft. So I imagine all of those will be topics of our October 4th agenda, plus anything else the committee adds to the agenda. And Edward and Lima, I know, are on the call. Anything else to add?
No, looking forward to October 4th.
Great.
This is Nalima. I have nothing more to add. You got it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to have a discussion with the BiPOC group, and this is going to be led by Councilmember Ferguson. And as part of that discussion, if you'd like to include some introductions, you are welcome to do that, Councilmember Ferguson. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Sure. We have a number of staff that are on the call and other council members from the committee, but I think just in sort of the essence of time, maybe we could do away with the introductions. But we've had two meetings in the BiPOC committee talking about the 2040 plan and the 2050 planning process. So it Thrive 2040, and then thinking already a little bit about 2050, and really discussing how have we done as a council and applying our equity lens with respect to the 2040 plan. There's been some questions as to whether or not could we do more? Should we do more in relation to 2040 plan? And then we also been thinking about or getting feedback from people as to what should we do differently for the 2050 planning process with respect to infusing equity into that process. And so we just wanted to bring that back to this group and get feedback or thoughts, insights, expertise from this group on really on those two questions. Couple of sort of themes that have come out are really, you know, around the 2040 planning. I think, you know, there's just people have questioned, you know, we applied an equity lens. People question whether or not we should have done or should have done more, but we didn't. So now the question is, how are we applying that lens? How are we measuring success against the goals that we had in the plan? And are we reporting that out well? And so I think feedback on just from this group as to their view of how well we're doing with respect to the equity goals that we laid out would be good. And then with respect to 2050, it's really thinking about what should we do differently, right? So what are the, we've got a lot of community experts around in this group, but what should we do differently? What should we start putting in motion? Because we have as a council started the 2050 planning process at a very at a higher level, but we've started that process. But what should we be doing differently now so that when the process starts in earnest and everything's being sent out to cities, et cetera, to get the process started, that we are have things set up to ensure that we're going to have the best outcomes from an equity perspective when plans are coming back. So those are really the two key questions that we've been looking for information on. And, you know, just as a reminder, the BiPOC committee is a subcommittee of the management committee, so we don't have the ability to sort of vote on anything and move things to council, but simply looking for information to make recommendations back to the appropriate committees for them to take action related to equity in the planning process. So with that, I don't know if any of the other council members wanted to, Riva or if Linnea is on, to chime in on our work.
Yeah, this is Councilmember. I was just going to say, I don't need to say anything. I'm looking forward to hearing from the group and want to thank the EAC members for their service, ongoing leadership in the council.
And this is Councilmember Chambliss. Thanks for inviting us to be a part of your discussion today. One of the things that we recently talked about was looking at some of the barriers to equity within our organization as well as outside of our organization and how we can overcome that. A lot of discussion about accountability and using measurements and evaluation to ensure that we're meeting our goals.
Great, thanks, Riva. Thanks, Linnea. So just maybe our purpose of being here, if there's questions that somebody has, that we can definitely answer them, but really is to get that feedback from this group and just sort of thoughts, insights, recommendations of things that we should be doing differently in relation to 2040. Maybe we start there, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about 2050. I don't know how much time we have, 15, 20 minutes or?
Yeah, we should have another 25 minutes. So we have plenty of time to get input from our members. Yeah.
I see there's one hand up.
Go ahead, Anita.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering if it's possible for us as EAC members to possibly meet with some of the BiPOC committee members, maybe attend some of the meetings, have some conversations with them, and create a relationship, a working relationship with them as a group.
All of the meetings are open for people to attend, so you're more than welcome to attend. think there's some concern on just asking too much of EAC members to attend a number of additional meetings, but all of the meetings are open for people to attend if they'd like to attend.
What time are the meetings?
4 p.m. on every other Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah. Just for myself, I think I'd like to have an opportunity to have some conversations with them, and just for myself, create a relationship, and it would help me better understand the workings of the Met Council from the employee's perspective, and not just from the community perspective of what I see from the outside, but basically that perspective from the inside working.
Okay, great. Brianne,
Thanks.
thank you.
Hi, Madam Chair, Councilmember Ferguson, thank you for asking the question. So I think there's a number of amazing initiatives that the Met Council is working on right now that are in an effort to bake and integrate equity in their policies and programs. And so first, just keep up the good work. I think you already are amending, maybe not formally amending Thrive, but you're amending the policies and programs that are prescribed by Thrive to be more inclusive and to be more race conscious. So I want to echo Edward's point that race conscious policies and programs are a necessity if we're going to close disparities. Also, I want to echo what you said, Councilmember Ferguson, that tracking it, deciding what data you're going to track and setting targets and tracking it is very important as well. And I believe in that council. Yeah, Councilmember Ferguson, you're part of the Center for Economic Inclusion Trust, and so that work helps with accountability a lot and tracking the actual data and the indicators. So keep up the good work on that, for sure. And then when it comes to whatever Thrive 2050 is called, I think there are amazing and endless possibilities for amending council policy and programs to continue to be more inclusive, especially as we look towards the update of the overall regional plan. And so to that, I would just say, if we can, as a committee, be a part of those conversations monthly or bi-monthly, I think we could have, we have a lot of ideas, especially at the subcommittee level, to influence things like LHIA and the new program. And not only can we contribute, but we can also augment and support the good work that's being done. Should council change between now and, which is highly likely, between now and the actual adoption of the regional plan. So anyway, those are my initial thoughts, but I just would say to continue to come to us, and when there are points of inflection or places that decisions are going to be made, to come to us and ask for our input on all these policies that are changing and these programs that are being rewritten to be more inclusive. We can help with that. So thank you.
Just maybe one quick question for staff on that is, I know this group was sort of born out of the 2040 plan. So how are we envisioning the EAC having a formal role in the 20 process and engagement with that process?
Madam Chair, this is Lisa Barajas, Community Development Director, and maybe I can answer Councilmember Ferguson's question to some degree. We are in the early phase of developing our plan for the plan, if you will. So this early engagement helps us to, I'm sorry, I'm going to put my video on. I feel that's not fair. This early engagement helps us to really build that plan for how we go about building the regional plan. I know that's sort of meta, but I really do want to, meet folks where and how they want to engage in the process. And I want to reflect what Councilmember Ferguson said earlier to really recognize that there's a lot of asks of people's time too. So we want to make it worth your time and focus on areas that you are interested in as well. So we'd love to have your input and feedback on that as we are not just on the plan itself, but on how we engage with you on the plan and when would feel like it would be most important. I know you have subcommittee areas, so that is one area, but obviously that's some markers for us to think about, but also just more broadly on developing the vision, developing values, really thinking about some of the big issues facing our region. I think there are a number of different places where we could and would really benefit from engagement with EAC and your valuable insights in your roles in the region. So I guess still under development and can always change to meet your needs as well.
Edward, I think Edward had a question.
Yeah, actually, it may be a questions, comments. Maybe we're BiPOC, and I find that kind of interesting to use that as an identifier, but I'm not sure where that term BiPOC finds its standing in identifiers for socially constructed people under the constitutional authority of the Budget and Management and the Census Bureau. And it's not necessarily an identifier that is readily recognized within the African American community because we're identified as African Americans and Black. Some choose to identify themselves as Black. So anyway, so when I hear the term BiPOC, I know its origins is from a couple people out of New York that was starting a movement of some sort to make sure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color were being identified better in terms of utilization and fairness and the administrative application of equal access and opportunity laws. But it's become so commonplace now that it almost seemed like a acronym that masks a lot of things. And that's just my opinion. Maybe no one else feels that way, but I do. And in the circles I run in, people see it that way because it's not legitimate. It's not founded in law. It was just two people that decided they wanted to start some movement using that term across the country. It's much like we use terms minorities or people of color. None of those help us with tracking any kind of data that affects the individual protected groups, because it's, once again, one of those terms that aggregate us all together. Therefore, you report it in an aggregate manner, and then it tends to mask utilization and underutilization of each of the protected groups. Even our state statutes under 43A and 363A, which is, the protected classes, do not use the term BiPOC. So I'm just not sure why that's becoming so commonplace to use that when it has no legal standing whatsoever. And again, it takes us away from all of this planning that can have targeted kind of impact and resolve the socioeconomic disparities, the underutilization that impact our communities. So when it's used, there are folks in my community anyway that see it as, once again, we're masking efforts to report accurately how each of the protected groups or protected class members are being impacted by what we do inside institutions like the Metropolitan Council or municipalities or the state. With that being said, I hope as we go into this planning process, terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion are feel-good terms, but they are simply analytical frameworks in order to ready an entity's ability to administratively comply with equal opportunity provisions. There are 3 major laws in this state that get at advancing opportunities for protected group members and protected class members to a great extent, and not drive the overutilization of the white community in the affairs of a government that we all invest in. And those 3 laws, the state laws, which they align with 473, which is the Met Council's operating statute that kind of embodies a lot of this, is 363A, which is our human rights law, 43A, which is our affirmative action program, and 16C, which is our contract procurement laws. Those 3 drive employment, how our monies get targeted to different groups in our community through contracting. And the other one is the enforcement and assistance necessary to ensure that entities are in compliance with the other 2, the human rights statute. So with that backdrop, I would hope that the Met Council, the BiPOC committee, or the council itself, and EAC will require that we do some type of audit of the administrative application of provisions in 43A, 473, 363A, and 16C, or our contract procurement, as it relates to the Met Council. Those equal opportunity provisions germane to the Met Council, to see where we stand in that regard, because if the administrative application of those provisions are not being adhered to, it is what's driving the disparities, inequitable opportunities, and things of that nature. So I hope that one of the baseline pieces before we move into an exhaustive planning process will be some audit of that nature or review of the administrative application of those provisions. Madam Chair, the last thing I want to say, and then I'll be quiet, is that I bring this forward only because, you know, there are a lot of folks that just hear the feel-good stuff, and we move into these processes, and it seemed like entities like this and those who are in charge with the administration of fairness or equity are not really serious about it, but just want to keep business as usual and not really try to take a lot of the pressure off of communities that are being underserved, underutilized, and voided from participating in what their money is paying for within local governments, Met Council, county governments, and state governments.
Thank you, Edward. I have a couple things that I'd like to add as well that I would suggest, and then we'll see if there are any final comments for Councilmember Ferguson and the other members of the committee. One of the things that I would like to lift up is looking out for and lifting up solutions that already exist in the community and recognizing and supporting those solutions. So for example, you might see some informal land uses that are really working well for communities that have traditionally been underinvested in, and maybe with some additional investment, those solutions would even serve a greater number of people. Things like informal workplaces or live work solutions or mixed generation housing or other solutions that community members are already implementing on their own, to really be supporting those solutions that already exist. And the other thing that I'd like to lift up is decision-making power. So one way to ensure that the process and then the ultimate plans have a more equitable outcome is to be really intentional about who you are giving decision-making power over what the plan looks like and what its goals are and what its outcomes are and how it will be evaluated, to people that have received inequitable treatment in the past. And there's a lot of strategies for doing that. One way is to actually seek out and hire people to be members of the team and give and invest decision-making authority and power within those individuals. So those are my two suggestions: to lift up and support existing solutions that are already being experimented with and innovated in the community, and then to be really thoughtful about who gets to make the decisions and ensuring that that decision-making power is shared in an equitable way. And I think I will just quick scan. I don't see any other hands up. Do any other members of our committee have anything else that they'd like to add? Okay. Edward, yeah, go ahead.
Just wanted to just mention to the BiPOC committee that maybe they can pull our work plans and discern what our subcommittees are trying to do and see to what extent any of that interests them at all as they're unfolding their plan. It sounds like that committee is eerily similar to some of the goals and objectives of EAC, and it could potentially have competing goals and objectives that convolute everything. And again, we begin to just churn in the mud because they now are advancing things that may differ a little bit from what we're trying to do as a whole. And sometimes those things can be intentional. So I hope they would look at our work plans, or we get our work plans to them so that they can consider that. And I agree with the person who wants to attend those meetings. I think we should have someone there so that there is some whatever's happening there, we at least get the information shared with us at our meetings as we go forward. Right now, the two committees feel eerily the same, and I'm hoping that that's not the case, but it feels that way right now.
Thank you.
You know, I would just say, you know, I think it's good for people to remember that the purpose, if you want to call it that, originally of the BiPOC working group was simply to create a spot where the members of the council that were BiPOC could get together and just have a conversation about advancing equity throughout our work, because we couldn't get together to have coffee without actually noticing the meeting because of the numbers in the group. So how it started was the group of BiPOC members wanted to get together to simply meet and discuss what things that were going through council, and see if there were things that would make sense for us to work on in advance. So that was the original sort of germ of the idea, was to, similar to the Posse Caucus and the Minnesota House of Representatives and other places. So it wasn't that there wasn't necessarily at the beginning, there wasn't sort of a goal, and there still really isn't. It's not sort of to replace the EAC. It's to give an opportunity for a subgroup of council members to meet and to talk about together, be able to talk about policy issues and delve more deeply into some of the issues that we'd like to talk about at council meetings, but in the 5 minutes that we have to talk about a business item, we may not be able to surface all of the issues that are relevant to us that we'd like to talk about.
All right, I think we will move on to other areas of our agenda now. Councilmember Ferguson, it sounds like there might be a couple follow-ups, including inviting, we could send out a formal invitation to our members to attend your meetings. And so I'll connect with you about the timing and logistics of that. And then I do agree that this, there is a bit of a tangle of different efforts that are happening and I recognize that some of it is that they are emerging and they're not formalized and they're being layered on top of systems that are highly formal and highly structured. So there's the equity change teams that are really focused on the internal processes of the Met Council and the experience for employees, but also have a deep interest in policy. There is the BiPOC committee, which you mentioned is focused on how to bring equity into the upcoming 2040 and 2050 plans. And then there is our committee, which is charged with addressing equity in policy issues for the Met Council. And all that is layered on the formal agendas that happen at council meetings, management and tab boards and other things. And so I look forward to continued partnership in really making sure that the voices that need to be at the table are heard and are being listened to, and that those perspectives are being folded into actual policies, practices, and systems.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is a presentation and discussion on the MTS transportation equity investment. So I will turn it over to our colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Amy Vennewitz. I'm with Metropolitan Transportation Services at the council, where I lead the long-range transportation planning work of our group. I have two others from my group with me today, Heidi Schalbert and Jed Hansen. If you guys want to quick turn your videos on and say hello too. And then I believe Greg is going to call up a short PowerPoint that we have today too. Do you have access to that, Greg? I think it was on the agenda. Or possibly Heidi, you could maybe do it too. So just as they're doing that, if it's all right with you, I'm going to turn my video off because I'm in the process of getting higher speed internet, and I often get a little bit of interruption here. So we're here today to talk about a project that we're going to be undertaking in the next few months. It will be going out to bid, and we'll give an overview of the work within the project, and more specifically, we're here to get your feedback on the membership, organization, and role of a policy work group that we're going to be creating as part of the project that will be in large part directing the overall work of the project. So next slide, please. So this project was funded as one of 7 projects that received special funding through the council last spring for specific projects that would advance racial equity. This summer, we worked with the Alliance to help us develop the overall scope of work, and we're hoping, as I said, to get it out to bid yet this fall, with the goal that we would have a consultant on board to kick off the work in early 2022. Until a recent conversation, we were anticipating about 18 months for the work, but we've recently gotten some feedback that might be overly optimistic for the scope of work that we're anticipating. The work will be specifically focused on, as I said, racial equity and also low income or low wealth communities, which are the populations specifically defined in federal Title VI and transportation environmental justice laws. So as a quick highlight of what we're doing in the project is going to evaluate up to 5 what we are calling project type investment processes across modes. We are going to, along with the committee that we'll be talking about today, select these project types and look and map the processes through which they are planned, funded, selected, and implemented. And then we will be working with the policy advisory group, policy work group, to help us develop a set of strategies, actions that will reduce inequities in the planning, funding, selection, and implementation of our processes, and specifically in the up to 5 processes that we select for evaluation. So the next slide, please. So within the work, one of the first steps that we will be undertaking is to form a project policy group. And this group will be community centered and will be leading the entire work of the project. So we are anticipating that we will select members that represent a cross-section of stakeholders representing Black, Indigenous, Asian, African, Latino, immigrant, and low wealth communities, and that these members will be a majority of the policy work group. We will also have members from the Metropolitan Council, and today want to discuss with you the potential of having a couple members from this committee also be part of this work, and then also our Transportation Advisory Board and MnDOT. We're estimating up to about 25 members, and as I said, the majority will identify in the racial groups or as low wealth communities, though we can have members that come with a variety of experiences and communities that they represent. We are at this point thinking that we would like to start the process of getting the policy group members identified and potentially formed and selected before we have the consultant on board. We were primarily thinking we would do that somewhat to save some time and to have a couple parallel paths going here, so that when the work kicks off later this winter, that we won't have a delay between getting the consultant on board and forming the committee. Though, again, I think that's an area we could use some feedback today, whether that makes sense or whether it really makes more sense to have our consultant helping us to form the policy work group. Our intent was to have potential members of the group submit letters of interest, and within that letter express familiarity with the council overall, some experience they might have had with a transportation and investment process or an outcome of a process that they were involved in, and then a general statement of interest in the evaluation work. And then we would work with our council members and potentially this group to actually select the members, and as getting a cross section of various cultural and racial backgrounds. And also we're concerned about having a variety of community types represented, urban, suburban, rural, because our transportation processes are also, we're constantly aware of the different functions that the systems play across the community types. Next slide, please. So the policy work group will be the decision-making body for this project work. We expect that the group will review and approve all deliverables and will work with the consultant to prioritize recommendations. The first step would be that the policy work group would work with the selected consultant to develop an overall group charter and decision-making chart, establish policies, procedures, shared values, and definitions to use within the work. The group would meet, we're anticipating at least monthly, but we also expect that we will be asking members to do some homework and potential work on their own in between meetings to review materials and think about the issues and processes and information that is provided to them. I should mention that we are anticipating that we will be paying the members of this policy work group for their participation and also providing stipends for childcare and transportation reimbursement that might be needed if the meetings become in person. The group members would be paid to the degree that they are not otherwise paid through their affiliation with an agency such as the council or MnDOT. The policy work group, along with the consultant who is primarily acting as a facilitator for this work, will start out determining its own operating processes and select a chair or potentially a co-chair, develop shared definitions and principles that are going to guide the evaluation work overall. And then within the work of the project itself, the group will be asked to help co-create the equity framework, the overall principles for how we will determine equity or inequity, and then a specific tool to use in evaluating, as I said, up to 5 transportation investment processes. And then after those processes are mapped and evaluated using the tool to create and prioritize recommendations and outcomes for this work. And we are expecting that the recommendations, strategies really for actions, will center around the council and our investment processes, but they may also touch the work of MnDOT, Metro Transit, and the cities and counties within the region that are involved in transportation processes. Next slide. The main project tasks for this work, once we have the consultant on board, we will finalize the work plan and schedule. And all of these tasks are along with the policy work group. We will establish stakeholder involvement and decision-making processes and points within the overall project schedule. We will do a high-level review and mapping of regional transportation investment processes where the council either controls the process, is highly involved, or in the end is a decision maker at some point of the process. We're anticipating these processes. It might be a total bucket. We haven't created the full listing yet, and that we'll be doing that with the consultant, but it might be 20 to 25 investment processes that we identify. We would then create an equity evaluation framework and tool, and then narrow the list of the investment processes down to up to 5, where we would actually pilot the equity evaluation and picking, as I said earlier, project types. So we would not be evaluating specific projects that have been implemented, but looking at general project types. And a project type might be a major rail transitway investment. It might be an arterial BRT investment. It might be a min-pass lane investment, or a regional bike corridor investment. So those are the types of projects across modes that we're anticipating we will be selecting from. Next slide. Okay, I thought what we are looking for from you today and is really some feedback on the use of the policy work group within this work, your reactions to the membership, and if there are interest of members in this committee. Also, what would be the best way for us to identify potential participants on such a policy work group, and whether you have specific groups that you would recommend we reach out to. We are anticipating putting it up on the web at this point as a general request for letters of interest, but we want to have kind of a marketing or outreach campaign to let various groups know that that opportunity is out there. The types of questions we might, or interest we might be asking for in a letter of interest, what types of questions should we ask of potential group members, and then how to best balance representation of different groups across both the region and across different racial and cultural groups, and how we might best kind of spread the interest around so that we have a well-balanced group expressing interest in this project. So with that, I will pause, and I can take questions. I'm not sure if I explain the actual work of the project in enough detail, so I can answer any questions about the work itself, or more specifically, some feedback on our proposed policy work group.
As with the previous agenda item, I will watch for hands in the amongst participants. If someone does have something that they're ready to ask or share, you could feel free, and then I'll be watching for raised hands to call on people. Okay, go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, can you, a couple questions, the timeline for this, what was the timeline for this again?
Madam Chair and members, well, we had originally been hoping, we're already running behind schedule, we were hoping to get it out to bid for a consultant response this fall. We would then have to evaluate the responses and get a contract with a consultant, and hoping to start the consultant work with the policy group in place early January, February of next year. And then intense work for at least a year to 14 months. We were hoping to have preliminary recommendations on actions by the start of 2023. The work doesn't have to be completely finished, but maybe we're envisioning some of the strategies and recommendations are going to cross investment processes, so that, you know, there'll be some general, here's what we need to be doing across all investment type processes, and then having some specific recommendations for specific investment processes.
Madam Chair, just a couple more. How does this align with the Biden administration's executive order for entities like Met Council, Department of Transportation, to do analysis of their success and failures with equal access and opportunity in contracting, and align that to ensure that it impacts protected group communities?
Madam Chair and members, I'll have a couple responses, and then maybe I need you to expand a little bit on your question. So this evaluation work is looking at the entirety of a transportation investment process, from how did the project need first get identified, why was the project kind of selected to be moved forward, what were the advisory groups, or what was the planning process that brought this project to be, how were decisions made across that process of funding the, first identifying the project, funding the project, designing the project, and then implementing it. So it's kind of taking a project from the very start of why did we even think we needed to implement this project to the final implementation. Within that process, there always is the selection of either a planning consultant at some point or a contractor that implements the project. So that would be a piece of the overall process that will come into the evaluation, but it's broader than just those pieces of the contracting.
I'm gonna go to Anita next, and then we'll do Brianne.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking back at some of the qualifications for potential members, and in reading familiarity with the Met Council or transportation investment, or even that experience, it seems to me that that language in itself is a barrier to some of the potential members, particularly immigrant refugee community who might not be as familiar because of their time spent in the state of Minnesota or with the transportation, or even their experiences. And so I wonder if you could maybe change some of those qualifications to make it more accessible to some of the groups that you're looking for, some of the people that might have an interest in it. I can understand a letter of interest, but even a letter of interest in itself can be a barrier in writing and putting that into words of a person who might be interested, but doesn't have, I don't want to say the know-how, but has never done something like that before, has never had the need to write a letter of interest, has never had that sort of background that you're looking for. Am I coming across to what I'm trying to convey here?
Yes.
Is that there are some potential barriers.
Yes, Madam Chair and member, that may, yes, I'm hearing your feedback, and I guess I have some questions because I'm interested in, we're trying to be as broad and inclusive and generate this interest. But do you have other suggestions of how to go about identifying potential members other than asking for a letter of interest of things we could do?
Not at this moment, no, I don't. And I'm trying to think of some wording. I mean, I understand that you need a statement of interest or a letter of interest, but I'm wondering if it just, I'm thinking of the application process we had for this group, this committee, the Equity Advisory Committee. We stated an interest in why we wanted to be part of this. And then there was an interview process and some conversation went on. And I'm wondering if it's the same type of process that you might have for this project committee. I mean, people will be interested in it, but when we're going so far as to, you know, expressing familiarity with the council itself, a lot of people don't have that familiarity. They get on the bus and they, you know, going past is part of the Metropolitan Council, or experience with the transportation investment process or outcome. You know, what does that mean exactly? And so I can understand the letter of interest, and I'm wondering if that's good enough. I know you want people who are experienced because you have a time limit on this, but I think I would say that we can trust that people, if the wording is a little bit more so that people can understand what it is that you're looking for and what the outcome is, I think that people would show an interest in it and, you know, do that letter of interest or even an application process or whatever, and explain their interest in it and why. I think that you would get the selection of people that you're looking for.
Yes. So, Madam Chair, what I'm hearing is, and this is really maybe the word that came to my mind was almost opinion. We want people who have experienced a transportation project or investment or process where they thought, this isn't working, or I have an opinion on this process and it could be better, and here's how I think it could be better. That's the kind of interest we're looking for as people who want to think about our processes and how to be more inclusive and how to be more equitable and how to think about the outcomes a little bit differently.
Okay. So when you're looking for people, maybe that's a good way to put it out there, is we're looking for people who have an opinion. You know, how is the transportation working for you? How is public transportation working for you? Have you ever taken the light rail? You know, are you limited to your access of a light rail? Those kinds of questions that I'm thinking for myself, it would maybe generate an interest in myself of saying, hey, I'd like to be part of that because, you know, I noticed my bus routes have changed and I want to be able to say something about that. I want to have some input in that. Why did they change? My bus doesn't, you know, it goes, but it goes 3 blocks or 4 blocks past where I used to get off. And now I have to walk back. And when I'm doing that late at night and in the dark, what does that mean for me? And could that change? So could I have some input into that? I'm just thinking of ways to garner an interest in it for people who actually would be affected by all of this.
Thank you. That's great feedback.
I will turn to Brianne now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just echo what Anita said. She said it a lot more eloquently than what I was going to say. How I would characterize it is just way less technical terms in terms of your recruitment. But yeah, do you have an opinion about the way transportation decisions get made. I think that's a great way to make it less technical in terms of how you recruit and what you're asking for. Being clear on the time commitment, number of hours per month, duration, amount of the stipend, whether it's virtual or in person. People can't commit to something they don't know what it is. And then being clear on the why. Why are we doing this? What is the intended goal and the intended outcome? You got to it after your presentation, which is what I heard you say, which was transportation decisions are made at various points along the way. Consultants are chosen, the projects are chosen, and at every step of the way, we could be incorporating equity better. And so that's the charge of this committee. And so just kind of being clear and concise on what the exact charge is, that was my version of how I understood what you said. I do think the EAC subcommittee, transportation subcommittee, should have at least, well, I was going to say one, but maybe at least 2 or 3 spots at the table. They can also help you recruit other people who represent the communities you're looking for, but also maybe have some opinions and or experience in transportation. I think just in general, this committee could help connect you with people, or just encourage people to apply might be a better way to say it. So using this committee as a source of recruitment, in addition to the people that would be appointed from this committee, also the others. And I think, around selecting the members, I think a few of the members of the committee should be selected before you get your consultant on, so that they can sit on your consultant review panel. But perhaps also the selected consultant can help round out the committee by bringing in best practices for getting people involved on such committees. So maybe it's an iterative process where you have the committee appointments first, and then they help bring on the consultant, and then the consultant helps finish out the policy group is what you're calling it. I'm calling it a committee, but you were calling it a policy group. The consultant that you hire should be from the community that you are seeking to engage, and should represent a choice grounded in equity. That's just my opinion, but I'll leave it at that. And there are some really great consultants, both locally and nationally, that I think would do a great job on this. So we can also help disseminate the RFP. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks. Again, really great feedback. I'm taking quick notes here, but we before we put a project out to bid, we can talk to consultants kind of in general about the work, and we have been in the process of meeting with potential consultants. So if you do have specific firms, DBEs, we have met with a couple nonprofits that are work in the area of equity and that we think would be interested in this work. We definitely would appreciate receiving any contacts. We can meet with them ahead of time, and we can also just generally make sure that they receive the RFP. So we would definitely appreciate any feedback on that too. And one of the consultants we met with, potential consultant, gave similar feedback that the consultant does need to be involved in helping to form the policy group too, so that we don't hand them something that's fully baked when they come on board.
Thank you so much, everybody. Edward, is your hand up again, or is it just still up from the last time?
This is up again, Madam Chair, and I apologize if it bothers you, but these kind of things, continue to happen. There are a lot of, just to get to some of the questions you have on there, a lot of professionals that have done, this kind of consulting on transportation projects with the Department of Transportation that are people of color. There are former professionals who worked in the Department of Transportation that would be some excellent people to have on your advisory committee. I also think that it shouldn't be void of somebody white being on there as well. These things impact them as well, and that doesn't feel very equitable to just see that the only people being targeted for a stipend to serve on this are people of color and Black and Indigenous people, while all of the white people are being paid salaries to oversee the project. And like Brandon said, I would hope that some of those same BiPOC people will end up with some full-time employment helping to facilitate these kind of efforts. But even a greater concern, or equally as great of a concern, is I mentioned the Biden administration requiring places like Met Council and Department of Transportation to do these analyses in anticipation of the federal dollars that will flow into the state of, into Minnesota and other places around the country. And I think many of us are aware that there is $1 billion+ in transportation money, that $1 trillion+ in transportation money that's sitting out there waiting to be divvied up amongst all the states. And the timeline, kind of interestingly, those dollars are to be used or in the pipeline of being used by the time this project is over with. I mean, what you're proposing here. And I guess the point I want to make is that I hope it's not one of those things where the BiPOC community is diverted into doing these evaluations and analysis and figuring out once again, with all of the equal opportunity laws on the books, how can we best achieve equity? They've been there since 1964. And every disparity study that you've done over the last 30 years say that you're not meeting those requirements as a subunit of the state of Minnesota. Mason-Tillman, 1999, MGT America in 2009, and then Most Keen Research Group in 2018. So all of these analyses have been done, and you are required under federal civil rights rules to submit these kind of analyses as a transportation entity anyway. I get where you're trying to go, but it just doesn't feel real. It just feels like this is a diversion away from the billions of dollars that will flow into the state of Minnesota that need to be contracted out for transportation resources. And I guess what I need to hear here is that this will not impede upon, quote unquote, BiPOC community getting their fair share of utilization on transportation dollars that will be appropriated by the federal government in the next few months, probably starting in January when this all kicks off.
Yes, I hear you, and I can assure you that this work is not meant in any form to divert or let us think that when the new funding, which we are sure to get increased funding and existing funding away from the communities that we're focusing on here, that is not at all the intent. The intent here is to really, in a detailed fashion, take apart how we operate, map it out, and ask ourselves questions at each stage of the process, some of which we control and some of which the council does not control, about question of equity and the benefits and burdens of these projects. So this is work that will happen simultaneously as money continues to be spent and within the region, and the longer range intent is to improve all the processes that we use to allocate the funds that are available. But it is not a reason not to continue to work on improving and allocating the funds, and we have to in an equitable manner in the meantime.
But Madam Chair, that hasn't happened. That's the whole point. And these kind of analysis and approaches have historically been used to divert attention away from that and be the convenient excuse to wait until we figured out how to best become more equitable, and then you'll get cut in on the opportunities. And I'm hoping that we ratchet up our efforts to not let another 30 years go by where all of those disparity reports say there's enough willing, able, and available entities out there, and with recommendations how you can even strongly improve that, be utilized to help with this work. And these things tend to surface each time there are major federal appropriations that are coming into the state. And then people have to fight like we did on the Green Line and other transportation entities just to get people working and contracting and getting entities like the Met Council, Department of Transportation, and others to just be fair and do what the law already say you should do. And that's, so when I see these, I think it's great on the surface. I look at it and I say, wow, this would be a good way of auditing how we administratively comply with the existing laws on the book. But at the same time, I can't help in the past seeing these very similar things be diversions away from the opportunities when these monies then come into the marketplace. So I'm hoping that, Madam Chair, the EAC, support these kind of efforts, but at the same time, we continue to press hard on making sure in current time, business enterprises across all communities are being used in an equitable way and not get caught up in, these things as the priority and not the opportunities, because there are willing players out there that are just not being utilized.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments and thoughts. I think in the spirit of that, it would be great to hear a report back about what you did specifically around the policy group, and then also what your contracting process was and who you ultimately selected for the consultant. It could be an email report, or we could invite you back in the future as well. So I think we'll end this agenda item now and move on to some of our other items, but thank you very much for being with us this evening, and looking forward to hearing how you used what we shared in your process.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for your comments and input so far. We are going to turn our attention now to our internal workings. And there's two aspects of our internal workings that we'll focus on. The first is our bylaws and making some adjustments to our bylaws. And then the second is we will talk about our vacancies on the committee and our process for recruiting and selecting new members to our committee. I am going to be sharing my screen, and hopefully I will be sharing the right one. All right. Are people seeing a table with our bylaws language on it? I don't hear anybody or see my WebEx screen, so I'm not sure if you're seeing my screen.
I see it, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So our bylaws were first created several years ago, and now that we have a few years of operations under our belt, I'd like to propose some changes. I've had the chance to talk about these changes with Co-Chair Gonzalez and with Cy. And before we move forward with adopting them, I wanted to get some input from our committee. I'm going to go through them one by one and just hear input. While I'm sharing my screen, I actually can't see hands raised, so I am comfortable if you just want to verbally share your comments with me. And then at the end, I'm going to ask for, we can't do a vote because we don't have a quorum, but I'm just going to ask for affirmation that we can move forward with adopting these changes and moving them forward for the to the full council for approval. So I'm going to start with the first change. Our current language says that each of our terms are 4-year terms, and that there's staggered terms that are geographic members end in one even numbered year, and then the next even numbered year our at-large members expire, and that they rotate. What I have found is that we have very passionate members that love their work, but for some, a 4-year commitment is a lot to offer. And so I have a proposed change that we change this to 2-year terms, and that we allow then within the 2-year terms there to be reappointment for up to 2 more terms possible with no additional application needed. What feedback or reflections do you have about this proposed change? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. And if something comes to mind for you about those terms, please feel free to come back to it. I'll make this a little smaller. The next proposed change that we've been talking about is to the co-chairs, both how co-chairs are selected and then who the co-chairs are. So I have 4 proposed changes to suggest, and these are a little complicated, so I'll take them slowly. So the first is that in addition to the community-based co-chair role, so we have 2 co-chairs, one is from the council and one is from the community, that we also select a co-chair elect and a past co-chair. So essentially we'd have a continuously rotating slate where we are, as a committee, we're selecting a co-chair elect. That person will serve for 1 year in sort of an observation role and learning the role. And then the next year they would be the co-chair. And then in their 3rd year, they would be a past co-chair. So each person would that wants to be in a co-chair position would serve a total of 3 years, although only 1 year they would actually be the co-chair. The reason for this is to offer some continuity to our committee and to ensure that co-chairs coming in feel prepared for the role and supported by mentorship and knowledge. And then our process for appointing co-chairs is not very spelled out in our bylaws. So I'd also like to add that we clarify the process for appointment in our bylaws, which is that members would express interest in becoming co-chair elect and the subsequent roles that they would play in future years, that the current co-chairs would make a recommendation from among interested members. So once the members express interest, the current co-chairs would make a recommendation, and that our committee, once the current co-chairs have made a recommendation, will vote on and approve that recommendation. I would also like to add that the co-chair term is a one-year term from April 1st to March 31st. And the reason that I'm recommending those, I would suggest those months, is because it coincides with the times that we are typically onboarding our new members. And then I would like to add some information about what to do when filling a vacancy, that either the past co-chair or the co-chair-elect can fulfill the term of a co-chair if for some reason they need a vacancy occurs. So this was a lot of information. I'm going to pause and see if you have any questions for clarification or comments. And this, just to let you know, this is the place where we have the largest number of recommendations for change.
Madam Chair, since you're not recognizing my hand up, I'll just jump in and say that it seemed to me from our structure that this document and any changes to it should be being discussed at the Operations Committee's level, and that no couple individuals or one person should have the authority to make changes that somehow satisfy them, and then bring it before the EAC for us to consider and vote on. In addition to that, I have not heard anything in your presentation about any of this that seemed to be quantified to any extent. For example, if we want to change it from 4 years to 2 years, it would help me to have some type of analysis of how many people who sought the opportunity to serve on this committee, knowing that the terms were 4 years, and then somehow between in that term dropped off and did not participate for the 4-year term. If that's an overwhelming number of people, then maybe this policy change makes some sense, but I have not seen anything like that. In addition to it, that, you know, there should be some quantifiable information related to the issues that you see in whomever else you work with to modify this document as it relates to co-chairs. So I'm not real comfortable, and maybe everybody else is, first of all, usurping our process for dealing with these matters by not referring this to the Operations Committee. And then secondly, not having I did read this before the meeting and looked at it, but I just didn't have enough information to form an opinion one way or the other that I believe would justify us messing with the policy at all. So I would be voting or would like to make a motion that we send this to the Operations Committee for further discussion, quantify some things, and bring it back to the EAC.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Edward. Yes, I cannot see hands raised while I'm sharing this on my screen. So if others have their hands raised, please jump in as well.
This is Phil Sterner speaking. The one thing I see is like the 2-year term seems to be so quick with it. And then if we're doing a 3-year on the co-chair one, which I see that as being a good for continuity, I would think if we're going to change the terms, it should go to a 3-year term from a 4 to 3 rather than the 4 to 2. Seems like a lot of time would be spent in interviewing candidates and kicking out for new candidates, and then sometimes it takes a little bit of onboarding for our committee members to really know what our tasks are and become a valuable member. So 2 years by the time I think they get in their running steps, they'd be off the committee. Like you said, you could re-up it in that, but I just think it might be just, if we are going to change it, to maybe just change it down 1 year. And I think how Edward said too, is that an issue that we have right now where there's only a couple people that didn't fulfill their 4 years, or do we see that for quite a few, and that's a big issue why people don't fulfill it or don't try to be a committee member, because it seems like such a big commitment. That'd be something to get more stats on. Thank you.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, this is Anita Ravina Davis. Just for clarification, Edward said that he thought it should go to the operating committee. Is the operating committee the operations of the Equity Advisory Committee, or is it the operations of the Met Council? That clarification, please.
Madam Chair, Anita, I was referring to Operations Committee for the EAC.
Okay, do we have one?
Yes. And we deal with policy-related matters of the EAC, the Met Council, administrative operations. It seemed to fit really well inside that subcommittee for discussion.
I think, so one thing to just respond to that, Edward, is I did explore a little bit with Cy and Councilmember Gonzalez where the best place to make changes were. And what I learned is that the full EAC will have to vote on any bylaws changes. So, and that the council, the full council, will have to approve them. So at this stage, I am hoping to gather input, and I do like the idea of potentially also gathering some input at the operations committee, and maybe there are even some changes that I haven't considered that there should be additional input. So, and I think it's important to hear from the full EAC since it is how we do our business. So I agree that the operations subcommittee might be one place, but I would be uncomfortable limiting all of the changes to emerging from the operations subcommittee.
Madam Chair, our process that we voted on was that it starts there. There's discussion. It's brought to the full EAC with some recommendations. Members of the EAC get to hear the justification for what we're proposing, and if they approve it, then it's then advanced on to the full council.
Okay. All right. I'm going to keep going with some additional changes that I would love the members that are here tonight to give feedback on, and then follow up with some of those things afterwards. So the committee vacancies is another place I wanted to share what the current language is. And I do want to share that this is in response to a challenge that we did have. So the current language says that committee members shall communicate their intentions to resign to the committee co-chairs in writing. And then when a vacancy occurs, will immediately notify the council chair, and the council shall appoint new committee member to fill the vacated position for the unexpired term. We want to add that seats can be presumed vacant when there has been a lack of attendance or a lack of communication. We have had in the past situations where committee members have stopped attending and we've been unable to get in touch with them to find out if they are still hoping to be on the committee. And we would like to add some information here that we can presume seats to be vacant after a certain period of time. Does anyone have any feedback on
that? Real quick question, Madam Chair. Was that recently this past year, or has that been since the inception of the EAC? Or has there been a pattern since the EAC began? Our committees are in flux anyway right now. People come and go. We never said that people had to be a permanent participant on a committee. Like our standing committee, you can show up with that at any time you want to. You didn't necessarily have to be there at the standing committee meeting. And our subcommittees, we allow the flexibility, understanding that people have, there's some who are very dedicated to those things and some who only have time to come in and out of those meetings. So I'm not sure, like I said before, this needs a lot more discussion than to just bring here, Madam Chair, and you don't have to accept the motion I made to refer this to operations for a broader discussion so that we prepare better to present it to the EAC. But I would like to make a motion again that we do that.
So I'll answer your question first, and then I would need help from the staff about how to treat a motion when we don't have a quorum. So, so to answer your question, this committee vacancy would only apply to the full EAC, so being a member of the full EAC, and the lack of attendance is related to lack of attendance at the full EAC meeting. It is not related to the subcommittee meetings or standing committee meetings. So I do appreciate that that should be clarified. And one of your other questions is, has that happened recently? And yes, that has happened recently. In the time that I've been co-chair, we have had people who did not attend EAC meetings, and we did not know their intention about whether they wanted to remain on the EAC. I do not know if that happened before I've been chosen as co-chair. So I can't speak to past data, although I might be able to learn that, but that has happened in the time that I've been co-chair. And so now I have to refer. Oh, go ahead.
Since we don't have a quorum, I'll rescind my motion.
Okay.
I didn't put in a quorum.
Okay. So I do appreciate that, Edward. I'm completely fine with taking this to the operations subcommittee. And I really value getting input from our full EAC about opportunities or challenges they see with these suggestions. And we can certainly then take the feedback that we get from our other members here who don't serve on the operations subcommittee and talk about them further in the operations subcommittee. So I don't want to preclude that happening, but I would really value getting some input from our additional members that are here.
Chair, Leah, this is Phil Sterner again. Just maybe one other thought. But a lot of times I've been served on committees in the past, like some of the state boards and that. And generally, if you miss like 3 meetings in a row, you're pretty much removed from the committee. So we could maybe have some language like that if someone is like a non-participant and it's pretty clear with no communication and missing like 3 meetings in a row, that we could presume that they're no longer interested and fill it in at that point, just a thought.
I think that sounds great. So we do have that related to attendance. So one of the challenges of this language that exists about committee vacancies is it requires the vacancy wouldn't be recognized until we received a written resignation. And as I explained this year, what we experienced is lack of attendance and then no written confirmation from the individual that they intended to resign. So I also am suggesting that we tighten up our language around attendance, that essentially if someone is absent after 2 absences, the co-chairs will reach out to them, and that, yes, agreed, that that the person would be considered, that the seat would be considered vacant if there are more than 3 vacancies, 3 absences, I'm sorry. Any other thoughts or comments about vacancies or attendance?
Yeah, Madam Chair, is the big issue with that around quorums? Having a quorum because we don't do it? I remember a number of years ago working with the Attorney General's office, and I believe there's case law that supports, not, and it may not be applied here, that meetings still can be conducted even if you don't have that quorum threshold. The quorum is then established by the number of members who are in attendance. We may want to just check on it if that's the case with a committee like this. At least we got that advice when I was the executive director of the Council on Black, Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage. And then we had some members, and because the governor couldn't fill those vacancies fast enough, our process was too long, that somehow we were still able to operate with the members that showed up, and the ones who had not been attending was not counted against the establishment of a quorum. We can talk to council here to see how we get around that piece. It may not be necessary to remove people.
That's a really great point. There are 3 issues that I've experienced with attendance, 3 challenges that I've experienced, and I would love if others have more. So the first is quorum. We haven't had a quorum since, I believe May was the last time we had a quorum. And so there have been some items that we haven't been able to vote on since then. Approval of minutes. I don't know if there have been any other items that have come up for a vote. The second issue is continuity. So having ability to build conversations from meeting to meeting it's limited when you don't have people that are attending consistently meeting to meeting. And I think there's some value in being able to build on prior topics and come back to them. And then the third issue that I'm seeing that I've experienced with lack of attendance is that I think in some ways the work we do is just, it's deep, and it requires a lot of different perspectives and experiences and knowledge and wisdom. My own knowledge and wisdom is limited by my experience and training, and having more voices at the table, I think, can really broaden and deepen our discussion to include more perspectives. So I miss, as a co-chair, having the attendance of the people that aren't here and not having the opportunity to hear their voices. And so for me, there are 3 issues when we don't have attendance, and would lead me to want to be able to really be a little bit more proactive about letting our new members understand what our policies are on attendance, and also have a little bit more flexibility to consider something a vacancy when attendance isn't happening, so that we can go ahead and fill that seat. And I'm curious if others have perspectives about attendance that they'd like to share and bring into the conversation.
This is Phil Sterner. I got my other perspective would be as the person is representing either geographical area or at large, so it's bigger than themselves with it. So I think it's important when they're not showing up at the meetings and they were put on the committee, that it's not just themselves that they're hurting who they represent. So my perspective would be more about that if they're not participating or showing up, that it's bigger than themselves, and that we need to have people engaged in the committee, and like you said, that we all matter and all make a difference on the committee.
Madam Chair, I'd like to add to that, having full capacity diversity and everybody committed to it helps with filling out participation at the subcommittees in our structure to get a lot of the work done too. So that would be important.
This is Nalima, and I would just like to say that I know it's been quite a struggle since COVID, and I know we've been meeting online for such a long time. But I would dare to say that I think the attendance of the committee has suffered way more with online meetings, as convenient as they may seem, than when we used to meet in person. And I understand, I don't know if the whole council, if there are just no meetings happening in person. I know there are a number of venues and committees and councils that have started meeting in person. But I mean, my observation is that we just had more energy. And I think the committee also has suffered a lot because there was this period we brought in a whole new committee, and a lot of folks have never met in person. There's never really been that, you know, relationship building, seeing committee members. And I'm going to speak for myself. A lot of folks, I mean, personally, I know I'm among other folks who are just totally zoomed out. And, you know, we come to these meetings, everybody's off camera. I am off camera today because people just generally don't get on camera. It's very disconnected. You know, it's a very disconnected setting. And we also have basically a new committee that transitioned in that has never really, you know, met in person to some extent, and, you know, really knows each other. That's just a personal observation, but there could be other reasons. But I know we have struggled way more with quorum than we've ever struggled before since meeting online, and it's been a very prolonged period of meeting like this.
Thank you, Nalima. I see we have just a couple minutes left, and I have really appreciated the feedback so far. So thank you so much. And I will bring this information back to the operations subcommittee, and we can report back next month with some recommendations for additional discussions. So I
Madam
appreciate
Chair,
it. Yes, go ahead,
if
Anita.
if I could, I'm reading the language of the work plan, and I brought this up before because I don't believe that the operations committee is the subcommittee to work on this particular language. The subcommittee that we approved, the language we approved are, let me go back to it. Meet the organization, talent recruitment, and diversity hiring needs through improved processes for a workforce that increasingly reflects communities we serve, enhance work culture and employee engagement to support council status as an equitable employer of choice, create clear pathways for employees' career growth and enrichment, refresh, elevate, and support employee management skills and practices within a culturally competent and inclusive leadership framework, measure outcomes, and provide transparency and access to workforce data. So in none of the language that we approved does it say that the operations committee, subcommittee, is also responsible for the inner workings of the EAC committee.
Mhm.
And so my concern is, since that language is not there, my concern is that, again, as Edward pointed out, a few people are working on this, and I don't feel comfortable with the few people on the operations committee rather than the whole EAC committee working on this together. That's just my personal preference, and I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
So-
And I see that you put that in the chat as well. I appreciate focusing on that work plan. And hearing those perspectives, I have to say that in most committees that I have participated in outside of the Met Council, there is usually an executive committee that's like the board president and the treasurer and secretary, and they are the ones that would bring changes like this forward to the full committee for discussion and adoption. We don't have a structure like an executive committee for the EAC. The closest we have is the co-chairs. And I also think that it is better to have broader input rather than just the operations subcommittee. So I do appreciate you kind of bringing us back to what the language is of what the charge of the operations subcommittee is. Thanks, Anita.
But Madam Chair,
Madam Chair. So,
Madam Chair.
sorry, this is Nalima. So what I'll offer real quick is, and I know we're struggling with quorum and, et cetera, even just as a whole committee to make quorum, but what I will offer, what the committee has done in the past, and this is how the current bylaws were created. We formed a subcommittee of folks who were interested in working on that issue, and they met and worked on this issue, and they brought the work to the whole committee, I think for a series of meetings. I mean, because at that point we were creating the bylaws from scratch. We were building everything from scratch. So that is the process. That is how that process happened. I'm not saying it has to be repeated, but I'm just offering some insight into how this has happened in the past in the absence of an executive committee, and how the whole committee was brought into the conversation and the decision-making process. Is a few folks volunteered to to do the work, and they reported at every committee meeting, and the committee got to discuss what the work that had been done and got to vote on the work, on approving or changing the work that had been done, if that helps.
That is a phenomenal help. And what I love about that is it allows us to maybe ask for people that have an interest in this and would like to serve on an ad hoc committee to look at bylaws, regardless of what role they're currently playing. So I'm going to propose that is the next step, is that we will send an email out to our full membership, indicate that there is some desire to update our bylaws, and ask for people who have an interest in drafting and working on this and bringing the work forward to our full EAC. Thank you for offering that, Nalima. We are now at 8 o'clock, and I did have one other EAC business item to address, and that is that we are in the process of opening up our vacancies for additional recruitment. And this is a process that's managed by staff, but with deep participation from our committee members. We have had several of our EAC committee members whose terms are not currently up, so they are not on the slate for a renewal, volunteer to serve on our nominations committee. Our timeline is that over the next few weeks, we would love you to send out email blasts to your network, people you know and organizations you know, with information about the vacancies. Katie Drischel has drafted email that you could send to individuals, an email that you could send to organizations, and some social media posts that we'll follow up and send by email, and you can send out to your networks. We're going to ask for applications due by October 17th. We will still accept applications after October 17th, but we're hoping that we can get as many of them as possible by October 17th so that we can start reviewing them the week of October 18th. And then with the idea that we would start our interview process the week of October 25th. And then the nominations committee forwards their recommended candidates to the full council, and the council votes on our candidates. and we will welcome our new members in January or February of 2022. I'll follow up with that timeline and the language that you can use to send our notice out to our members by email. And with that, as we are at time, I'm going to close our meeting. I do want to thank everybody for your words and perspectives today. It was a healthy dialogue, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Leah.
Good job, Leah.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good
Good
evening.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.